Hey, everybody. Thanks for being here for this Antelope-focused episode of Around the Block with GoodBlock. Very excited to have some awesome guests today. Yves LaRose from ENF, needs no introduction, and Guillaume from UX Network also might need an introduction. This is Guillaume.
No introduction for Gnome. No. And you said his name perfectly in French. It was really good.
That's right. Impressive.
My high school French teacher would be very proud.
Shout out to Douglas's high school French teacher. If you're listening.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure she is. Well, it's great to have you guys here. Unfortunately, Lucas was not able to join us at a late hour, but we thought it would best to keep going forward because what we're talking about here is very, very exciting and important. And I think people really want to know about IBC, interblockchain communications, and the new, really advanced functions that are coming out from Guillaume's work at UX and funded by all the Antelope chains in the coalition, and just very excited. So, guys, first of all, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Douglas. Welcome to you as well. Thank you for having us on.
Thank you. So why don't we dive in and talk about what IBC is, first of all, and how we're implementing it and how that might be different from other people who are implementing it. So what is IBC, Guillaume?
Well, the term IBC stands for inter-blockchain communication. And typically we realize that there's quite a few different interpretation of what that may mean to different people as we started discussing with the broader community, not just in the Antelope space, but I'm thinking specifically about these, let's say, like lively exchanges that we had with the Cosmos people on Twitter. But Douglas knows what I'm talking about. But for us, or at least for me, the way that we look at it is probably quite a technical terminology and quite technical perspective, but I think it's the correct one. Essentially, you have these blockchains that are basically like proof systems. You're doing things on a blockchain, and you want to be able to prove to the world that what you've done is coherent with the state of the system at any given time, that it has received the correct approvals from the actors that were supposed to approve the transaction, and so on and so forth. So we look at these as really like proof systems. And everything else derives from that. So you're essentially building applications where the core logic of importance is essentially how do you prove certain things to people? How do you prove that you have the funds? How do you prove that you have the right to spend the funds? And so on and so forth. So when it comes to inter-blockchain communication, we think of it as how do you prove to another blockchain that an action occurred on your source blockchain. So
to add to that, Guillaume, when you talk about proof, one thing that's important in the blockchain space, obviously for the listeners, it's to do so as well, but within a very short period of time, right? Because in traditional systems, you can prove that something occurred. It happens between T+3, T+5.
Exactly.
And so it's how do you do that globally in a decentralized fashion, almost instantly, as quickly as possible? So
very good point.
The proving is not what's the necessarily difficult part. It's the proving within a decentralized system in a very, very short time span.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, anyone who's used, let's say, like bank wire transfers, it can take anywhere between a few hours to a few weeks or even longer than that before you get that proof that the funds are there and that they are legit and the transaction is authorized. So, of course, yeah, like a very, very good point. We're trying to achieve that as quickly as possible in a safe manner, while also making sure that we do not introduce too much variance or too much unknown and how long that it takes, basically. And I mean, of course, Bitcoin was a great achievement when it was released, but we're still talking about like blocks of 10 minutes and can vary like quite a bit. There's been periods of times where no block is produced for several hours, and it's let's say like less than ideal for some scenarios, at least the kind of scenarios that we're looking at on the Antelope. In the Antelope ecosystem. So coming back to that definition of proofs and lively proofs that can be realized very quickly, we try to define IBC as the ability, as I was saying, for a chain to essentially receive a proof that something happened on another chain. So this is the core like technical definition that we chose essentially. And now, of course, on that system, you can build all sorts of other things, such as probably one of the most obvious and most important protocols is essentially what we refer to as wrapped tokens. So having the ability, for instance, to take your telos that are on telos and move them, so to speak, on EOS and transact them there, exchange them there, sell them there, buy things with them there, and so on and so forth. So that's one of the very obvious and critical application that can be built on top of that.
Right.
And ensuring that there's no duplication, right? So that
exactly preserving all of these. Yeah, preserving all of these.
That's the challenging part.
Yeah, exactly. Like preserving this double spending protection and these replay protections and all these kind of things that are that happen on a single blockchain, but now that also need to be carried to that multi-chain environment. Yeah.
With potentially different consensus mechanisms, with different validators, with different parameters of different chains. They have the underlying software stack that's very similar, but they also have very key differences.
Oh yeah.
So kind of consolidating all of that to avoid that double spend, and doing so in a very short period of time.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's a heavy lift, right?
Yeah.
Up until now, blockchains really are systems unto themselves, right? It's very hard to say, okay, this is something that happened on another blockchain. I mean, it's completely unaware. The solution that people have been using to date has been to use oracles, right? But an oracle is a centralized transmitter of information, and very much like bridges that rely on these. It's a weak point, right? So it's not hard to say, oh well, hey, we're wrapping tokens on Ethereum and sending them to Polygon. The thing is that in almost all cases, you're going through a centralized bridge, which is based on an oracle.
You are as well in this case, but there's an important distinction that it's not a third party; it's the chain itself. Yeah. So theoretically, I would say that there's still an oracle in a way. It's the chain itself that is the oracle to a certain extent. And so if you trust the chain itself and the validation itself, that's why we say it's trustless, is you're already there. So there's no extra trust layer, which is what that oracle that you're referring to is, an extra trust layer, which is typically not the consensus layer of whatever chain that you're on.
And also there's almost like an internal ledger that is run on an oracle, right, or a bridge, saying, okay, this is over here, now this is locked up, and so we're going to like send the magic info to say create it over here, right? And the difference, and we should get into this because this is kind of stuff. The difference is you're using Merkle proofs to show on chain A, origin chain, that it absolutely is locked up. And therefore the wrapped version can be minted on the destination chain.
Exactly.
Right?
If I'm not mistaken, Guillaume, so outside of the security, which obviously is huge, the trust part is very big, wouldn't there also be more overhead to use a third party oracle? So in terms of computational power, in terms of speed, in terms of cost, those are extra things that are not captured within the system because you do one extra hop.
Well, yeah, I mean,
so theoretically, it depends, faster
because
if it's chain to chain, as well as cheaper.
If you were, I mean, you could imagine a scenario in which the oracle model would actually be like instant if you wanted, because essentially, like what it really comes down to is you have this oracle, let's call it like Bob, who's running a software, who's looking at the source chain, and then Alice wants to make a transfer. Bob sees that, he basically automatically can create an action on the destination chain that matches what Alice did on the source chain, such looking at the tokens, for example, and that could be very instant. But of
Is
course,
it
like
that
if you
instant
start,
though that if we're working on an instant finality and we're able to
yeah,
get instant, we're able to get lib to a sub-second or 1 second or very close to a second, we've got that on both. In that instance, once we get there, wouldn't that third party still now be slower? Wouldn't that introduce actual latency potentially? Or do you believe that everything could happen in the same block? They can capture it in the same block. They can transmit it in the same block, essentially?
they probably would not be able to capture it in the same block. It would at least be 1 block difference. But I think it's going to be
At
more or
least.
less the same once, at
Okay.
least. Once we
Okay.
get to the instant finality part, I think we're achieving very similar type of response that it would take a single oracle. And of course, to your point, I mean, if you are obviously like the single oracle model is terrible because then you have this Bob guy that like is essentially in
Just
control of
Bob.
everyone's fun, just literally Bob.
Let's say Sam.
Let's call him
say
Sam. Let's call him Douglas. Let's call him Douglas.
We can all trust Sam.
Let's call him Douglas. Yes, all right.
So I mean,
I think you can trust. Hopefully, you can trust Douglas more than you can trust Sam. A lot of people trusted Sam and shouldn't have.
But I mean, and obviously, one improvement over this is you can trust a federation of oracles, like a multi-sig of oracles, and this is where it might take a little bit more time because now if you're trusting a multi-sig oracles, now each of them have to
You're also waiting on lib.
and then they have to create this multi-sig transaction. They all have to sign it, and then like this may take some time. There might be latency, and you're kind of subject to the worst latency possible in that multi-sig. Like whoever is the slowest to respond will dictate the speed, the pace at which this happens. So that's
whatever cost they charge to fulfill that function.
Exactly.
As well.
Like there's a lot of bridges out there that use this model, and they of course there's a cost that they pay, and they want to charge that back to the user. So like there's many bridges that carry a cost with them. So anyway, but all this coming back to our solution, essentially, we decided that was not an option to use external exogenous sources of trust. We wanted to limit this to the trust that was already imbued in the validators of these two chains. So if you're on EOS and you want to transfer tokens on Telos, it's reasonable to assume that you trust the governance layers of these two chains because you're essentially like using them both. So we wanted our approach to essentially be limited to that trust that was already there. And we also wanted to be able to do it without the validators of these chains having to do anything special about it. Because of course, like there's other ways where you could have like some sort of second software that all the block producers would be running that would achieve this consensus on state that you could have essentially like a more, I guess, like along the lines of what Dan Larimer wanted to do originally with IBC. Like he wanted essentially the same block producers to be running all the chains and to be essentially like running this multi-party oracle between the chains and just doing that. But that was not good enough for us as either. Like we wanted to have something that didn't require the permission of block producers to do, didn't require them to do anything special. So it had to be entirely based off smart contracts. Passive, exactly.
Yep.
So we ended up, like having to do the hard, do it the hard way.
Took you 2 weeks, right? Like 2 weeks or so to come up with this. Yeah.
yeah. 2 weeks starting
over a weekend and a couple of pizzas.
Yeah. That's about right. Started in 2019, and 2 weeks later in 2022, we're done. Yeah. So yeah. But no, and I mean, like this was a lot of research and development, like trial and error, digging through the code, like looking at all the research that has been done in the field already. It was a really good learning experience. Like that was definitely something really interesting from the intellectual and technical point of view. So what we ended up doing really is implementing the consensus mechanism that is the default on Antelope chains, which is essentially DPoS plus ABFT. And we implemented that as a smart contract verification protocol. So essentially, you have a smart contract that resides on the source chain, now on the destination chain. Now you want to do something on the source chain, you do that action, you gather elements of proof that that action actually occurred, and that this action was included inside of a block, and that the block has reached finality, and then you submit that to the verifier contract on the destination chain. And just from that proof alone, the verifier can say, yep, this is a valid transaction, this is a valid block, it has reached finality, thus the transaction can be included. And then something can happen based on that. So for example, in the case of this minted wrap token, if you have a proof that you locked it on chain A, you can use that proof to mint it on chain B, and vice versa. If you have a proof that you burnt it on chain B, you can use that proof to unlock it on chain A and redeem the tokens.
Now, obviously, this is easier between Antelope chains because the software itself, the underlying software, 99% of it, 95% of it is the same. Consensus mechanism at the base is the same, as you mentioned. Some parameters are different that need to be taken into account, but in general, it's the same that's communicating with the same. So the barrier to entry was slightly lower. How do you envision, and what have you done? Because I'm interested in this part, so that after Antelope chains now start communicating with one another, what's kind of the way forward afterwards, and what have you, because I know you've worked on some of this with others out there, right? Because that's also what's interesting, is between completely different chains, not kind of the same family.
Yeah.
How does that approach change? Basically, does the model remain roughly the same? Like, what are the considerations, the concerns, the difficulties, the barriers to overcome there?
So first of all, I mean, there's a big kudos to give to Dan Larimer and the engineers at Block One when they built what is now Antelope, at the time was called EOS.io. And essentially, like, they came up with a very good way to essentially create this Merkle tree that is used to essentially generate these proofs that can be then used for IBC and other things. So they did it in a very elegant and very, let's say, like a compact way, as opposed to Bitcoin and Ethereum, for example. Bitcoin and Ethereum also uses, they use Merkle trees and Merkle proofs, but they've done so in a much more naive way, and that requires a lot more, lot bigger proofs, or a lot bigger, context when you're trying to evaluate these proofs. So typically, this approach that we're doing is extremely difficult to do on other chains because the way that they've structured their Merkle trees. And there's research that's being done right now to kind of improve that. Like, it's a big field of research on Ethereum right now to improve the way that they handle this, because they are realizing that it really doesn't scale all that well the way they've done it, to make it really scalable and really easy to integrate these proofs. But regardless, because Antelope is so performant, we're still able to, on our side of things, to verify their proofs, because we have access to lots of computing power, we have access to lots of RAM, and we're able to really perform very complex calculations that are almost impossible to do on a normal EVM, for example. So we've been able to essentially prove actions occurring on chains like Ethereum, like Binance Smart Chains, on Antelope. We've built verifiers for that. We've also built EVM-based verifiers for proofs that exist that can occur on Antelope. That's also something that works. But I think the main key to make it actually viable, economically viable and performant, and have a good user experience is the second part of that project that we're working on right now for the coalition, which we call instant finality. Because essentially, as it is right now under DPoS plus ABFT, it takes essentially almost 3 minutes for a block to become final and to be essentially irreversible. That's quite long, and it doesn't have to be that long. So what we're doing is we're working on a consensus mechanism upgrade that is essentially moving away from this DPoS plus ABFT, and will essentially espouse the principles that were outlined in the hot stuff consensus mechanism. Hot stuff is a consensus protocol that has been developed originally, I believe, by VMware, and that was selected by Libra, the Facebook sponsored cryptocurrency that was basically didn't see the light of day. But they did a lot of research back then about what was the best state-of-the-art mechanism to achieve consensus in proof-of-stake systems. And they realized that hot stuff was probably the best. And it is actually really nice. Like, I mean, I've been working on that for a few months now, and it is actually really good. And one of the characteristics of it is that it allows you to reach this finality very, very quickly, like within probably, I mean, a few seconds at most. And most of the time, probably even between 0.5 and 1 second. So that
like
is
1 to 2 blocks, which is instant.
Yeah, I mean, and all of this, of course, will depend on the exact topology of the network, the hardware the block producers are running, like how many hubs and how well they're meshed and all of this. But it's extremely fast and very lightweight as well. These are essentially like allows us to reach consensus by just adding a few little hundreds of bytes messages here and there being transferred between the nodes. And this is just one of the many benefits of moving to the hot stuff consensus mechanism. So we'll talk about that at some point. This is where it really is interesting in the context of IBC, the instant finality part of things, because now you can achieve what we were just discussing a bit earlier, which is these instant, like we're talking about really like 1 second confirmed final interchain transfers, which is amazing. Like this is really good. So
in a decentralized way, without having to trust anyone, therefore eliminating risk. Again, we always have to remember, like, everyone else who does these things super fast is doing them because they're doing them on a centralized ledger that they have pure control of. And
Well, and maybe you want to talk about deterministic probability versus probabilistic determinity.
Yeah, well, I mean, because typically you have these. There's one category of systems, proof of work, typically, that uses this probabilistic finality, where generally speaking, you reach some probable threshold at which point. It's at some point that you should not
number
be
of reversed. Number of confirmations typically.
Number of confirmations. Yeah.
All right. The threshold has been met. That likely it passes the threshold. It is now final,
exactly. Which is different because essentially, like,
that's key.
You never really know. Like you have a probability, but you never really know. And I mean, there's always a chance that someone has, 51% plus of the hashing power that have been mining their own chain in secret. And at any point, they can essentially override the main chain by revealing their own chain that has accumulated more proof of work. And I mean, like, that's one side of the argument. There's many, like, this is a debate that will probably go on for a very long time. But on proof of stake, you can achieve essentially like deterministic and like, I guess, like true finality,
final finality,
because you can essentially bake in some rules that say that once, for example, in the case of EOS, once 2 rounds of 2/3 plus 1 block producers have created a block that is linked to a previous block, that previous block is marked as final, and everything else, like at that point, it cannot be reversed. Like, these are the rules of the system. Right. So that's a different
and being able to do that in 0.5 seconds or 1 second paired with then the capacity to be able to speak between chains really means that those two chains effectively at the tech level almost become one.
That's definitely one way to look at it.
In terms of scalability, now you're able to essentially multi-parallelize what one can do horizontally. Effectively, you really could parallelize it indefinitely, right? So you actually do achieve, or you create the environment for unlimited scalability to potentially become realistic. So now how do you actually, which data do you put on each and how does that work? That's still yet to be determined. But at least now you kind of parallelize what one can do horizontally towards essentially unlimited.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's where the IBC thing is so amazing, is it opens up like every chain. You just mentioned it. For me, that's the part that I find really interesting, is the chains right now are optimized for single use. They're optimized for, in most parts anyways, on Antelope, for single core as well. So everything is done so that you can achieve the shortest amount of finality possible, that deterministic finality as quickly as possible, that you can process as many transactions as possible, so that throughput is incredibly high in a consensus mechanism that is trustless. But because of that, you I guess the con of that is that you're not really going widespread. But with IBC and with instant finality, that's when then you kind of close that gap in a way. Whereby it doesn't really matter what the performance of one chain is capped at, which is already tremendously high performant. The threshold is great. Now you're able to expand that horizontally. And that's really what IBC is, for me, is amazing. Both of them combined is great, but IBC unlocks that.
One way or another, if we are serious in the, let's say, like the blockchain, crypto, smart contract space, if we're really serious about a world where the vast majority, if not the totality of transactions are happening on these platforms, we have to be able to scale in well into the millions of transactions per second. Once you've added, the foreign exchange market, all the stock markets of the world, like all property transfers of the world, like art and NFTs and like the execution of all contracts and all of these things, it really needs to be able to support like millions of transactions per second throughput at peak periods.
Otherwise, it remains a niche technology, right? Because even if you wanted to leverage it, you just can't. And that's why centralized systems, like you mentioned, are so much faster, because a centralized ledger, everything in the house has very little overhead, but you'd lose that trust component. So if the idea is that we're building on trust and we're opening that trust, we're not there yet in terms of being able to even offer that as an actual solution widespread to the mainstream. And really, IBC is one of those key milestones in order to achieve that.
Yeah, no, exactly.
So there's two ways to think about how we can use IBC to scale. One is being able to have completely different chains like EOS and Telos, EOS and Wax, communicate and send value across from one to the other with no risk and no centralized authority in practically 2 seconds, I would say, which is still, because you're having maybe at the fastest, you're having maybe 4 blocks, maybe 5 blocks, but that's still far faster than anything else. That's still perceptually, that's instantaneous for Web 2 users. So that's one big thing, right? Because then you can have all these different ecosystems can interact almost seamlessly. But then there's the other piece of it where each individual ecosystem, right, sharing the same token, sharing the same rules and whatnot, they can have sidechains, right? People have talked about sidechains before and generally haven't understood what that is, but that is that horizontal scale. So Wax could have Wax, main Wax, and then it could have the alien planets Wax, and then it could have all these different pieces for individual uses or just general. It's almost like sharding in
it's similar to, I guess, what Polkadot does as well with their parachains. I'm not sure it's the exact same thing, but it's this idea that you internally could run your dApp as an actual chain internal to that. So it'd be like intra-blockchain communication at that stage kind of thing. Which then unlocks the power of the resources and all the benefits of that to that particular application itself, right?
Because don't forget, we're not limited to only these wrap token transfers across chains. Any action that occur on a source chain can be proven on that destination chain. So for example, another thing that's very interesting to me is, let's say you're staking your tokens towards resources, or you're essentially like buying, let's say, like power up on EOS. You could have these actions essentially have consequences on other chains as well. So you could have essentially the same token. You're on Telos, for example. You can stake your Telos tokens to CPU or to Net or to RAM on Telos, but you could also stake them to a Telos sidechain, for example. And then that would give you access to the resources on the other chain if you're able to prove that you stake them on the main chain. So like and you can like sky is the limit really, because you can also cast votes in the same way where the votes effects would take place on that other chain. So you could also vote for the validators of that side chain on the main chain with the tokens of the main chain, concentrating the governance power and the economic power of the tokens in just one place, but still having these rippling effects that affect other ecosystems, other chains. And we've discussed also with Jesse on another podcast, but we were talking about, let's say in the GameFi world, you could even have, like you're playing that online game with your friends, and you decide to have like this battle somewhere. You could have a chain that is spawned just for the purpose of running this battle, just for that one particular battle, and that chain would just run for the time that it takes for that battle to resolve. And then after that, the consequences, like whoever won, whoever got the rewards, like is brought back to the main chain, and that side chain can.
And it never took resources of the head chain, right?
Exactly.
All these ad hoc chains that are that are temporary and yet still deterministic.
Exactly.
It's very exciting. Also, so here's a use case that I find kind of interesting. There, we built Telos Decide, which is a governance engine, and all Telos that are staked can vote on those. Using IBC in the future, it would be very interesting and possible to say, okay, well, those Telos tokens are on EOS, and yet still be able to vote the wrapped version of the tokens that are on EOS or WAX or UX or whatever, and do whatever the voting is on the main Telos system.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
So and vice versa. So therefore, and across whatever chains have these governance systems. So you wouldn't be stuck with saying, okay, your Telos are off Telos, so you lose all your voting rights. They could be on EOS, they could be wherever. And then once you think about that, then you think about which one of the things I really was excited about and hoping we could do when we first came up with Decide. And that was saying, here's a technology that could bring a much finer grain, granular, and more pleasant governance experience that is based on an Antelope chain, Telos, and uses all the strength and speed of that, but also can take things that are on Ethereum or take things that are on an EVM or any other connected chain, IBC connected chain, and govern those in a way that brings all the advantages of the ease of use and transparency and all those things that we put into Telos Decide and Decide Voter, right? And brings those into all kinds of chains. So you could govern Polygon contracts. You could govern things across all kinds of chain, any kind of chain that's built into the system. And so that's really exciting to me. And of course, it works with other things too. It works with, imagine being able to make some kind of almost composable transactions from different DeFi spaces, right?
Yep.
Super exciting.
Yeah, what I like about that, kind of like what both of you mentioned, is then you're able to fragment the different utilities of the token without creating derivatives, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So that you can single-handedly take everything that the token can do, still do it without necessarily having the token present there on that chain, but also ensuring that it can't double down what it can do as well. And this is the typical wrap token, and we saw this in, I think it was Solana, this idea of TVL, and it was found out that one single application actually had TVL behind it, and then they created a derivative of it, and a derivative and a derivative. And so you ended up replicating everything. It was something like 90% of all TVL was actually based on this one thing. Well, now what you just talked about is that you're able to fragment that utility, voting in this instance, or whatever it may be, whatever utility that the token gives you or affords you, single that out while still have access to the token to do other things. So, hey, my token benefits better from DeFi on this chain, but it benefits better from governance on this chain, and it benefits better from whatever, something else on this chain. And you're able to actually kind of move it around.
Yeah.
Use the token and use your property for its inherent value and utility without kind of being limited to one location. I think that is one of the things I think that is interesting here for me as well, is we have no idea the use cases. We have some ideas of what the use cases of IBC are going to turn out to be, but until that's deployed and until people start playing with it, really, we have no idea what kind of use case is going to come out of this, right?
Right.
So this is the functionality that's going to be made available. Then it's going to be up to people to actually leverage that functionality and think of some crazy ways, kind of like what DeFi did in NFTs, etc. Now people can start building, leveraging the functionality, and that to me is really exciting because I have no idea what's going to come out of this.
Yeah, when YouTube first came out, right? People thought they knew how it was going to be. They thought it was going to be used for distributing movies or document, different things like that. They thought of simply the most one-to-one versions of what was happening already in the sort of the traditional video space. But what happened is we get unboxing videos. Who would ever have imagined that an unboxing video would be a thing, right? Who would have imagined that watching somebody eat and then tipping them, would be would be a thing. Like, there's so many types of videos that came out of just having this new set of tools and saying, hey guys, you figure out what to do with it. That is going to be the same thing with blockchain interactions. One great example that I was thinking about is it's very important to have large pools of liquidity across tokens, right? So for each of these things, ideally it'd be great to have a single place that you can have at least all the Antelope chains and have a single source of utility, because the larger the source, the larger the amount of utility, the more of liquidity. Sorry, the greater utility that liquidity has. So if you were to have a single source, that would be fantastic. But even if you're looking at how things are now, right, where let's see, we're going to have on Telos, we're going to have a bunch of EOS and a bunch of Telos and all these things locked into liquidity, you lose all the other values of that liquidity, of that token, all the other utilities of that token, right? As you were saying, Yves. But do you have to, right? Like, maybe those things should still vote. Maybe those things should still get you whatever the token ownership does. It's mostly governance right now, but imagine there could be a lot of things. Right now, we push these into wrapped tokens or even locked up liquidity tokens, and suddenly it's not yours anymore, and you just no longer have that value, which you can have.
Because the utility right now is locked with the token. So when you send your token somewhere, you lock it somewhere. That utility is that's why I meant by like fragmenting the utility of the token is you'll be able to actually fragment the utility of the token. This particular inherent utility of that token, I'm not sure how yet, but will be able to be pulled away from the token itself for that particular thing. We don't have that right now. Unless, because I don't even think right now
we do. We have that.
but if you staked your token right now into something, you would have to create the replica of the token and then not actually.
What we did on UX. This is probably worth another entire discussion, but just to give you a little bit of a teaser, let's put it this way, we created a model that we call TCTU. So it's kind of the mathematical representation of it, where you have a token T that you lock into a contract, and then it creates two tokens, one that we call the TC and one that we call the TU. And typically the TC will receive long-term economic benefits as well as governance rights, and the TU will receive utility rights for that particular token. And it has a maturity date, like time to maturity. So essentially, when you lock it, you create these two tokens that will at some point in the future expire at which point you can redeem the TC for the T, and the TU just disappears. One good analogy here, let's say you have a token that represents ownership of a condo or a house or something like that. You could split the token in two, have the TC that represents the ownership, and the TU represents the rental agreement or the utility of the house, like the ability to live in it. And now you as the owner, you can decide that you want to sell the TU, the rental rights, to someone for a period of time. And then by owning that TU, that person now has the right to live in that condo unit, for example, and they pay you rent, so you receive that rent. But you on the other end, you keep the TC, the title to ownership for that asset, and you can also use it, let's say, as collateral for loans and things of the sort, another DeFi contract. And you can now start creating these very, very interesting structures, because now you can at the same time that you have your house, you can rent it through that model at the same time that you're putting it as collateral for something else. So this is the kind of thinking that we try to implement in these models. And this one goes right in the same direction that you were mentioning, Yves, where you can split that utility from the governance or from the long-term stake in the project, and so on and so forth. So this is the kind of things that I think down the road, and in the, let's call it like in the DeFi 2.0 or 3.0, like the version 1 of DeFi, I'm not a fan, but like the upcoming versions of DeFi, once we've got the basics done correctly, I think it's going to be life-changing. Like, it's going to be a game changer for a lot of people in the world. And having structured system like this will allow for something really, really like beautiful to emerge.
Yeah. I believe that very quickly in the next round, right, when the next cycle of crypto growth and, crypto spring and summer, we are no longer going to be accepting of chains that don't have a robust IBC type infrastructure, right? So because they simply won't be able to scale. So you'll have things like Antelope, where Antelope chains are able to scale within their group and horizontally scale themselves, right? As we've all discussed. And Cosmos and Polkadot are likely to have this too, and Ethereum or EVM type chains will have maybe not the same amount of inner blockchain communication, because it's much more challenging, right? But they have such a big installed base that basically there's a lot of things that are coming back onto Ethereum. But if you don't have those, if you're not in one of those ecosystems, especially increasingly, if you're not in an ecosystem that can also reach out to other ecosystems, then you're not going to fit into the future model of these millions of transactions per second on a block mesh, right? That's all sort of tied together. So I think a lot of things that don't have that are gonna fall away. And I think it eliminates sort of the utility of a lot of L2s, right? The current kind of form of L2s that are on Ethereum, because they're just not going to be needed,
right?
And they're kind of be
Someone was asking me like, what's a roll up, and I was give them the analogy. I was like, this is like a really, really good horseshoe. It's really great if all you have is a horse, but it's completely useless if you have a car.
That's great. The world's greatest horseshoe. Yeah, it does nothing for your car. Absolutely. Yeah. So it's going to change things a lot, and I don't think people can currently imagine generally how much this is going to just be a dividing line in the crypto industry. And you're either going to have these things that can have this massive scaling very quickly, without risk, without any kind of manual interaction, all those things. You either have that or you don't. If you don't, then you've just kind of fallen off the game board, because all the things that have that are just going to replace what what those chains can do. right?
Okay.
If I have something that can go from EOS to Polkadot to Cosmos and back, right, seamlessly without any risk, without anything like that, then any system that doesn't tie into that eventually is just of no value, right? It becomes extremely niche. It may not be of no value, but it's it's an island, right?
Mm.
As opposed to being archipelago or a uh, with a key, the Florida Keys, right? I'll have bridges across them, right? You can get from one to the other. If you have an island somewhere out in the middle, you can't, right? And so it's not useful.
I would agree that that's the case in the long term. I'm personally not convinced that that's going to be the case and required in the next wave. I think that it's important to do it now. So I also want to caution that.
Yeah.
Because I don't think it's in the next wave. I don't think that that's what's going to make or break the next wave personally. I think we still haven't leveraged the power of a single chain yet at all. I think single chains, even as they exist right now in Antelope, have way more performance and way more output capability than has been asked of them. So I think there's still one more cycle before that. However, this type of functionality will take years to be able to develop and to leverage. So even when IBC launches, let's say in a month or 2 months or something like that, because it's already it's already functional. Essentially, we already have it running on between test nets. The utility of and all the tools and all the tooling around that and all the documentation and basically everything around that, because essentially a new ecosystem needs to build around this, will take, in my opinion, years. So in order to have that kind of as a requirement, or in order to be able to leverage the full power, I think it's going to be 2 cycles, not just the next cycle. But
I agree.
I agree. Also kind of premise that with, because it's going to take so long, if you don't do that now, you are going to miss the boat when it's time. So you'll be able to catch up. And I think it's important to note that as a coalition, we also ensure that what we're doing is open source so that people will be able to build off of this, because I think it is important for the whole space to be able to grow out of this. And like Guillaume was mentioning, he's looked at hot pockets and I forgot hot press.
Hot stuff.
Hot stuff. I was like hot pants. He's looked at hot stuff for a while, and he wouldn't be able to do that if a lot of what the tooling is. And so for me anyways, it goes back to Web3, and kind of one of the premises that I believe is key to this is a lot of open source, a lot of collaboration, because we're so early, it's so nascent. So we are doing our part as an Antelope Coalition. I'm extremely proud to be doing our part for something that I think is so key that others are going to use, and that actually puts eyes on the Antelope Coalition to showcase that we've got extreme talent in-house here within the coalition. We're eating our own dog food. We'll be able to showcase use cases of that actual functionality, so that people can start building off of that. Maybe we position ourselves as now people. So we saw this with other bridges, etc. When it was all oracles and bridges, people gravitated towards those that were deploying resources and time on building these. I'm hoping anyways, that people will start gravitating towards Antelope and see that this is a function that we provide to the greater ecosystem and that we're able to build off us. So I'm hoping that other people recognize the tech here. They recognize the IP that's been built and that's being given freely to the world, so that they start building onto that. And it really positions Antelope as one of the centers, because I think there's going to be competitors, but one of the centers of locations where, all right, this is kind of whatever Web 4.0 or Web 3.3 or whatever you want to call it. This is an upgrade to the thing that we've built upon, which is the previous generation. So either way I look at this, to me, this is incredibly bullish. Like, I think we're playing a huge role within the larger ecosystem, something that's extremely difficult. It is a technical challenge, requires a lot of resources, a lot of time. As Gil mentioned, he did it in 2 weeks, which took 3 years. So to get here, other people, if they start today, they will inevitably have to leverage something that somebody else has built, as you mentioned, because it will be, I believe, I agree with you, not necessarily a requirement, but that is what will separate people, whether or not they can open up. One thing that we hear a lot lately when I'm on the road is this concept for the applications anyways, of wanting to port or to deploy on multiple chains, not just on one anymore. So that tribalism of I only want to deploy one place is kind of going away, because the application is saying, but I want to deploy everywhere. Ideally, I want to deploy everywhere because I want to expand my community to as big as possible, expand the liquidity potential as big as possible. I just want to be able to, kind of like what Guillaume mentioned earlier, if this is going to be the base of the internet, or this is going to be the base of everything we do, that base needs to be connected everywhere. It can't just be one by one by
Right.
one. That doesn't work.
Right.
And this
So
IBC is key to all of that really long-term vision.
right. This is the TCP/IP. This is the HTTP, the protocol that's going to allow that. To clarify, I don't think that this is going to come to maturity in the next cycle. It's going to take multiple cycles, since that's sort of how we measure time in crypto. But I think that in the next cycle, it's going to become apparent, right? Because we are going to be showing that we can do 100,000 transactions per second on some kind of payment channel, because we've got 5 side chains that are sort of linked together to do this, right? We can prove it. We can suddenly the limitations that people had before go away, because it's you can continue scaling it. And investors, smart money, businesses, all the people who are sort of at the leadership of not creating these technologies, but of trying to recognize which ones are going to have legs, they're going to be noticing these within the next cycle. And then, people down a layer are going to be noticing them in a cycle after that. But I think that by this next cycle, you're either in there or you're not. And yes, you say that everyone can adopt these things later on, and that's true. But one of the things it means is that the people who the protocols, the 1, 2, 3 protocols that come in and get leverage now are going to be the ones that they're not going to be new ones generally created once good ones get set up, right? So unless there's some
the market share is ready to be taken, right? Like it is. I agree with you on that for sure.
Yeah. In the future, what'll happen is other chains will figure out how they're going to go to Antelope IBC, standard protocol, or whatever, Cosmos standard or whatnot. Now, something could come and replace all of them if we leave a lot of holes in coverage, right? So if it's not super fast, like we're talking about, like if it's 5 seconds or under, then then there's no room, because this is 3 seconds. Well, nobody cares, especially when we are really talking about 2 or 3 seconds, right? From one chain to the other. So if we have that speed, if we for example had left some kind of manual process that had to happen in the middle, or any of those things, those would be areas where somebody could come in with a better protocol. But Guillaume, you've covered really all the bases, and so there's no unaddressed need that I can see right now that would be a vulnerability, so that another protocol could come in.
If you think of any, just let me know. We'll be happy to work on these.
Well, yeah, I mean, it is going to continue to grow and expand.
I think like it's important to recognize that we're so early. I mean, it sounds weird for people like us, like the three of us that have been in that industry for like 10 years or something. But I mean, it sounds weird to say that. But if you look at, say, just like, let's call it like quote quote modern banking, that's an industry that's been around for 500 years. And like if you look at other industries like metalworking, it's an industry that's been around for like 5,000 years. And like we're an industry that is 12, 13 years old. That's really, really young. It's impossible at this point to see all that will eventually stem out of it. The only thing we can do really is to, in my opinion, is to think in these first principles and try to build really solid building blocks that other people will then use to build the cathedrals of tomorrow. So it's kind of that's my approach. Like I try to figure out like, okay, like what is the one thing that I know I'm going to be needing in all of these other like grandiose ideas that I have, and I'm going to start building these first. And then when I have 2 or 3 of these blocks, I'm going to assemble them to build another bigger block that I'm going to also be using in a bunch of different things. And just keep working like that. And others also like are contributing their own blocks and taking your blocks and combining them together to build bigger blocks. And at some point, sooner or later, we'll have something that's going to be really, really
Get a tipping point, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's how things happen on these other chains too. Ethereum was pretty much like useless
Dead.
and
Yes.
dead until like a few years later, where like people started finding utility from various of these building blocks.
Right.
To me,
CryptoKitties was
Ethereum,
really a significant shift in
yeah,
Ethereum, because people
I mean,
saw for the first time, I can do something with this. It really,
these
I mean, you
were
could do
the
something
early
beforehand.
NFTs.
Yeah, but that was mainstream.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, like, same thing for DeFi. Like, I mean, to me, like, I started being like interested in what was happening in Ethereum probably in like late 2019, 2020, which was already like 4 or 5 years after the chain had launched, because now people were starting to build interesting DeFi building blocks, like things like Curve and Balancer and things like that. But this is still like so early, so rudimentary compared to what exists in, say, TradFi, that eventually you'll see like versions of these TradFi protocol being implemented as DeFi protocol, and then this is where it becomes really, really interesting.
And then that's going to still be so early compared to everything. We're still so early. Yes.
Of course, I mean, like, we have to build these things to eventually, be interplanetary, like, trading systems and stock exchanges and things like that. We have to. There's an infinity of things to do. We're so early.
Yeah, well, we're building a moon base now.
That's right.
It's not quite interplanetary, but we are at a point where we really do have to think about these things, and it's great that we're going to be running these on satellite. That we have sort of the physical infrastructure, and now we need the technological infrastructure. So, guys, this has been a great conversation. I know it's such a big topic; it's hard to eat the whole elephant all in one sitting. I think we've taken some really good bites of it here. And I want to continue talking about this in other formats, but my hope is that people really got a sense of just how expansive this is, how exciting it is, how nerdy it is in the good way. And so I want to thank you guys for being here. Anything we should cover just before we wrap up? Anything that we've missed that's so crucial?
I'll just close with nerdy is good. Nerdy is good.
Nerdy
makes
good.
The world go round. Like, nerdy is building the foundations. Yes, it's important.
Couldn't agree more. Yeah. Couldn't agree more.
All right.
Thank you very much. This is awesome. I mean, just having this chat in this type of format, very informal, but getting into quite a lot of details without any kind of formality, I think is a really great venue. So thank you very much for setting this up, Douglas.
Yeah, thanks.
Well, thanks for being here. My hope is to make this a regular thing, like every 4 to 6 weeks, because there really is so much to talk about. I mean, we haven't really even begun to talk about all the things we could be talking about IBC, let alone instant finality. These are some deep rabbit holes, but for the nerdy is good crowd, I think it's pretty exciting. So thanks, guys. Thanks for all the work also. That goes into making Antelope work, right? It's a pretty exciting thing to me, and we all spend time on it every week, and I'm just really jazzed about the stuff that's coming down the pike for it. I can't wait for IBC to be here. Frankly, I can't wait for instant finality to be here. I'm already thinking about the things that I want to do. Like I told you guys before, I want to use instant finality to increase the number of block producers on Telos, right? I want to use all these uses.
Let's have a chat just about that one, just about instant finality. I'll give you guys a bit of an overview of what is possible with this new consensus model.
Super excited about it, Guillaume. So so let's do this again in a month or so, and I really appreciate you guys being here. Appreciate everybody who's watching this, and hope you hit subscribe and like the video so you can see the new ones coming up. We have some other really interesting things coming down the pike. We don't just talk about Telos things. In fact, the one we did last week was a pretty interesting conversation about the printing of tokens debate on EOS, and so we're trying to cover topics that are interesting to people across blockchain, across Antelope, not just Telos. And anyway, thanks for letting us do that today. I can't wait to have you guys back.
Cheers, guys. Take care.
Cheers, guys.